All right, to start this video, I just want to go over a couple things that I know people have had issues with when they're trying to use NVIDIA filters. And the first thing being that some people have an error that pops up that says something along the lines of a supported game is required to use this feature. Now, I've had this issue before and it's actually really easy to fix. All you have to do actually is go to your NVIDIA control panel. And once that loads up here, you just got to go to your Manage 3D settings. And then you're gonna click restore right here. And once you restore it, you're gonna have to apply it. And then you're gonna have to go back through and change all these settings back to what you had them on before, which really sucks. But once you do that, that error should be fixed and you should be good to go. Another thing I've seen people have trouble with is streamers actually who try to use NVIDIA filters, specifically streamers who stream on a single PC setup. And they say they get like flickers when they're using the filters, which obviously looks horrible on stream. So it's actually another really easy fix. So in OBS here, all you have to do is go to the little plus sign to add your source. I'm sure you know how to do that if you're a streamer, and then use display capture instead of using game capture, and that should fix the flickering issue for you. Although I do know that using display capture does add a little bit more input lag than game capture does, but in my experience it wasn't even noticeable at all. So hopefully that helps some of you guys out there that were having issues with NVIDIA filters. But let's just get into the game and let's go over all the filters. All right, so I'm sure most of you guys are aware that the game looks a lot different now. Like inside these buildings, they lit them up a lot more and everything, which is super nice. And the game does look a lot better with filters off. But one thing I noticed is that when you put my old filters on, the game has this really bad bluish tint to it. And that seems to happen when you're brightening up the blacks in the game. They almost turn to a bluish color, which just doesn't look very good. So with these filters, I've tried to minimize that as much as possible. It's literally impossible to completely get rid of that effect, which really sucks. And the game just doesn't look as good as it did before when you're using NVIDIA filters. But this is what the game looks like with my new filters. And if I actually put on the old filters here, you're gonna see that really bad bluish tint. Notice how much more blue it is. So I've been able to get rid of that bluish tint as much as possible, but I don't really think there's any way to get completely rid of that bluish tint unless you're just not brightening up the game at all, which the reason you're using filters is to brighten up the game, make it easier to see people inside of buildings. And this is actually what the game looks like with the filters off. As you can see, it's a lot more dark inside this building. And then if we turn them back on, you can see a pretty big difference here. And then if we go back to the old filters again, you can just see how blue it is, and it just doesn't look good with these old filters anymore. But with these new filters here, I've been able to minimize that bluish tint effect, which I've gotten down to a minimum. You can't get them any lower unless you make the game darker, which really does suck. So I'm just gonna go up to one of these super dark corners up here. So this is what you see with the filters on. So the corners are pretty well lit up, but if we go and turn the filter off, you can just see how dark it is in here, and it's going to be really hard to spot someone in these corners. So these filters do brighten the game up a lot without giving it that super blue effect, because look at the old filters right here. It's just really blue and gross, and it just looks disgusting. But with these new filters, it does get rid of that bluish tint a good bit and looks a lot better. There is something else I want to show you guys with these filters is if we go down here to a window, actually, because for some reason when you're looking out a window in this new season now, it's like almost impossible to see anything for whatever reason. So if we're looking out this window here, this is with the filters on, and then if we go and turn the filters off, it just looks like a mess. So turning the filters on, it really like brightens and sharpens it up, and it really negates how bright the sun is. So if you take a look at the sun with the filters on here, how bright it is, and then you turn it off, the sun looks a lot brighter, and it's a lot harder to see people when you're looking in that direction. So turning these filters on helps that a lot. But one issue with the filters is when you're outside like this, the game does look a bit dull, which does kind of suck compared to when the filters are off. When the filters are off, the game doesn't look as dull. So let's just go back into this building here. I'm going to go over all the filters, what some of them do and what you could change, because filters are going to look a little different on everyone's setup. So what might look really good on my monitor might not look as good on your monitor, so you might want to adjust a few things depending on how everything looks on your monitor. So we're gonna go over these on this window here. So for starters, we want details on top. Now what I've noticed with details is that's the real killer when it comes to frame rate, but if you don't have details on, it basically makes using the filters almost pointless, because that is what really brightens up and sharpens your game. We did some of this testing on stream, and I noticed that I get about 10 less frames when I have details on compared compared to when I had details off. So details really is what's tanking the frames the most on the filters, but then again, they're the most important part of the filters. But under details, we have sharpen at 65%, clarity at 65%, HDR toning at 25%, and then bloom at 0%. Now, one thing you could mess around with a little bit with details is if you want your game to look brighter, you could turn this up, but then again, this is going to bring out that bluish tint effect a little more, so that is why I kept it down around the 25% mark. And then after details, you're going to add brightness and contrast, and these are the settings for brightness and contrast. I have exposure at 0%, contrast at 25%, highlights at -100, and shadows at -100, and then gamma at 0%. Now, if you want your game to look a little less washed out, you could up this contrast a little bit, but keep in mind that's going to make it a lot harder to see enemies and buildings, so that's why I keep this around 25%. And then highlights, I know a lot of people put this at 0, but if you look at the sun here, when I put it back up to 0, notice how bright it gets when I put it back up. It makes the sun a lot brighter and makes it a lot harder to see when you're looking towards an area with sun. So when you crank it back down to -100, you'd notice that the sun is not nearly as bright, and it's a lot easier to look into the sun and spot people in areas when you're looking in the general direction of the sun. But then again, putting highlights at -100 does make the game look a little more dull. So if you don't like that look, you could put this up a bit, but I don't like how bright the sun gets when I turn this back up to the 0 mark. So I keep this at -100. And shadows, turning this all the way down is what, you know, gets rid of shadows, makes it a lot easier to see in buildings. So I really wouldn't recommend adjusting this, because keeping this all the way down is going to make it a lot easier to see people in buildings. And then if we go down to color, color is pretty much the same as last time. We have tint color, tint intensity, both at 0. Temperature, I used to have at -5. Now I keep this around 0. And then vibrance, I have up to 50. Now vibrance might depend on the monitor you're on. Some people might want to turn this down a little bit. Some might want to turn it up more. It really depends on how it looks on your monitor, because everyone's monitor looks different. Some people's monitors are a bit more vibrant than others. So maybe play around with these settings a little bit, see what looks best for your personal setup, and hopefully you guys enjoy these filters. I know these filters don't make the game look as crazy good as they did before this new season came out, but they messed with the lighting or something in this game. So unfortunately, the filters don't look as good as they once was, but they still do make the game look a lot better than the game looks with the filters turned off. Although you are going to be losing around 30 FPS from my experience. I mean, again, everyone's setup is completely different, so you might lose a little less frames than I do. You might lose a few more frames than I do. It really depends on your setup. So give them a try. Let me know what you guys think, and hopefully this video helps some people out there. If you did enjoy the video, please drop a like. I'd really appreciate that, and subscribe if you're new. And just a reminder, I do stream pretty much every day that I'm not uploading to YouTube, so if I don't have a video out, I'm most likely live on Twitch. But thank you for watching, guys. Here's the web. Peace.